The summer of 1879 brought the kind of heat that made men mean and whiskey flow like water. My saloon, the Crossroads, sat at the edge of Willow Creek, Colorado, not much more than a dusty thoroughfare between the mines to the west and cattle country to the east. I'd seen all manner of men pass through those swinging doors, but the stranger who entered that scorching Tuesday afternoon was different. I was wiping down glasses when the batwing doors creaked open. The usual chatter dimmed as a lean figure stepped inside, silhouetted against the harsh midday glare. He wasn't tall, maybe 5'9", but something in how he carried himself caught my attention. His clothes were trail-worn and covered in a fine layer of dust that spoke of many miles traveled. No flashy guns or fancy attire, just practical riding clothes and a weathered hat pulled low. "Whiskey," he said quietly, placing a coin on the bar. His voice had a slight eastern accent, not quite Boston, maybe Philadelphia. I poured him the drink and watched as he took it to a corner table, sitting with his back to the wall, eyes scanning the room with calm deliberation. Across the saloon, Hank Dutton and his crew were deep in their cups, celebrating a cattle sale that had gone their way. Hank owned the largest spread in the county and made sure everyone knew it. As the liquor flowed, their laughter grew louder, their stories more boastful. "Hey, barkeep," Hank bellowed, "send another round for my boys." I nodded and began pouring. That's when Hank noticed the stranger. "What about you, mister? You look like you could use more than dust in your throat." The stranger nodded politely, but declined. "Appreciate it. One's enough for me." "One's enough," Hank mocked, his voice carrying across the saloon. "What kind of man nurses a single whiskey in this heat? You some kind of temperance preacher?" His boys snickered on cue. The stranger didn't rise to the bait. He simply took another small sip of his whiskey and returned to his quiet observation. This seemed to irritate Hank even more. Nothing bothered him like being ignored. "I'm talking to you, stranger. Where you headed that's so important you can't join real men for a proper drink?" "Just passing through on business," the stranger replied evenly, not raising his voice. I felt the tension rising and moved closer, ready to intervene. The last thing I needed was trouble. Times had been hard enough, and a brawl would just mean broken furniture I couldn't afford to replace. "Business?" Hank snorted. "What business would bring someone like you to Willow Creek? You don't look like no cattle buyer, too scrawny for mining work." The stranger finished his whiskey and stood. That's when Tom Wilkes, Hank's right-hand man, stuck out his boot, nearly tripping the stranger as he moved toward the bar. "Watch your step, pilgrim," Tom said with a mean grin. "Floors can be tricky when you're not from around here." The saloon went quiet. Every eye was on the stranger, waiting to see his reaction. I reached under the bar where I kept a loaded shotgun, just in case. "Another whiskey, please," the stranger said to me, ignoring the laughter behind him. Hank wasn't having it. He stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the wooden floor. "I don't think I like your attitude, mister. When a man offers you a drink in my town, it's rude to decline." "Your town?" The stranger turned slowly, something changing in his demeanor. "I was under the impression Willow Creek belonged to all its citizens." "You got a smart mouth for someone." "Outnumbered," Hank growled, his hand hovering near his pistol. "What happened next seems like a blur in memory." The stranger moved with a quickness I'd never seen before. His coat swept back to reveal not just a revolver, but something else that caught the dim light of the saloon. A silver star. "U.S Marshal Daniel Hayes," he said, his voice now commanding the room. "And I'd advise you to reconsider your position, Mr. Dutton. You could have heard a pin drop in that saloon. Even I nearly dropped the glass I was polishing." Hank's face went pale. "Marshal, there must be some mistake." "No mistake," Hayes said. "I'm here investigating the disappearance of 3 homesteaders and the unusual burning of their properties. Properties that I understand now adjoin your expanded range." Hank's hand dropped away from his gun. "Those were accidents, lightning strikes, lightning that strikes only homesteaders who refuse to sell." Marshal Hayes raised an eyebrow. What an unusual weather pattern. I noticed then how the other patrons in the saloon were suddenly finding reasons to leave. No one wanted to be caught in whatever storm was brewing between Hank Dutton and a federal marshal. Mr. Sullivan, Hayes addressed me by name, though I hadn't introduced myself. I'll need a room for a few days, and I'd appreciate any assistance you might provide regarding the town's dynamics. I nodded, surprised to be pulled into whatever investigation was unfolding. Of course, Marshal. Got the best room upstairs. As Hayes collected his key, Hank and his boys retreated, muttering threats that lost their conviction with each step toward the door. After they left, Hayes returned to the bar. Sorry for the disturbance, Mr. Sullivan. Most entertainment we've had in weeks, I replied, pouring him another whiskey. On the house this time, though I suspect things are about to get more interesting around here. Hayes didn't smile, but something in his eyes acknowledged the truth in my words. The quiet ones usually have the most to say when the time comes, he remarked, lifting his glass slightly. Here's to hearing what Willow Creek has been keeping quiet. I clinked my glass against his, uncertain what I'd just been drawn into, but certain of one thing. Marshal Daniel Hayes hadn't chosen my saloon by accident, and I was about to learn why. Dawn broke over Willow Creek with news traveling faster than wildfire. A U.S. Marshal was staying at my saloon. I found Hayes at a corner table, maps spread before him, his eyes focused with predatory intensity. Philadelphia, he said without looking up as I poured his coffee. That's where you're from. Law books on your shelf. Harvard educated, from the binding style. You're not just a barkeep, Sullivan. My hand froze mid-pour. We all have our reasons for leaving the past behind. Do we? His gaze cut through me. 3 homesteads burned. 3 families vanished. Nobody asked questions. Why? I set the coffee pot down harder than intended. Fear has a way of making people blind, Marshal. Dutton owns half this town outright. The other half he owns through debts and threats. And you? Where do you stand? Before I could answer, the door swung open. Sarah Whitaker entered, 22 years old, wearing grief and rage in equal measure. Her father was among the missing. Mr. Sullivan. She froze at the sight of Hayes. Miss Whitaker. Hayes stood. I'm investigating your father's disappearance. Hope and terror flashed across her face. Not here, she whispered, eyes darting to the windows. They're watching. I led them to my back office, barely closing the door before Mabel Johnson, the mayor's wife and town's most reliable gossip, entered the saloon. New customer with Sarah? She asked, eyes narrowed suspiciously. Land buyer, I lied smoothly. Nothing interesting. She leaned closer. They're saying he's a federal marshal. Be careful whose side you choose, Michael. This town has a long memory. After she left, I poured myself a shot of whiskey, something I never did before noon. 20 minutes later, Sarah emerged from my office, eyes red, but spine straight as steel. She slipped out without a word. Hayes followed, his expression dark. Dutton isn't working alone. Sarah showed me threatening letters her father received before the fire, letters mentioning territorial government connections. The pieces clicked together in my mind. Judge Harmon, he's been buying land through proxies for months, positioning for the coming railway. The same judge who would hear any complaints against Dutton. Hayes' eyes hardened. The very same. A commotion erupted outside. Through the window, I saw Dutton and his men surrounding Sarah in the street. Her shoulders trembled, but her chin remained high. Hayes moved for the door. I grabbed his arm. Wait! Rushing out there marks her as your informant. We circled through the back alley instead, emerging just as Dutton seized Sarah's arm. Going somewhere, Miss Whitaker? Heard you've been telling stories to strangers. Let her go. Hayes' command sliced through the murmurs of gathering onlookers. Dutton's face darkened. This doesn't concern federal authority. Local matter. She's the daughter of a man who owed me money." "Liar!" Sarah's voice cracked like a whip. "My father owed you nothing." "He signed agreements," Dutton snarled. Hayes stepped closer. "With signatures that don't match his handwriting. Curious coincidence." "You're exceeding your jurisdiction, Marshal," Dutton warned, but uncertainty flickered in his eyes. "Kidnapping, fraud, murder, and conspiracy with territorial officials like Judge Harmon, all federal crimes." Each word landed like a hammer striking an anvil. The crowd's whispers rose at the judge's name. For the first time, I saw fear flash across Dutton's face. Sheriff Cooper arrived, hand on his gun. "Marshal, with all due respect..." "3 people. Missing, Sheriff," Hayes cut him off. "Properties transferred through forged documents. This stops now." Something remarkable happened then. People who'd kept their heads down for years began to watch openly. Mrs. Jenkins pushed to the front of the crowd. Shopkeepers exchanged glances. The balance of power shifted before my eyes. Dutton sensed it too. "This isn't over," he growled. Retreating with his men, Cooper looked torn between his loyalty to Dutton and Hayes' unmistakable authority. He muttered something about keeping peace and skulked away. "Miss Whitaker needs somewhere safe tonight," Hayes said, his hand briefly touching Sarah's shoulder. Something passed between them, a current almost visible in the dusty afternoon light. "My saloon," I heard myself offer. That night, as Sarah slept upstairs and Hayes worked by lamplight, I found myself staring at my law books, untouched since Philadelphia. Hayes glanced up, catching me. "You've chosen sides now, Sullivan." "Perhaps I've just remembered who I was always meant to be," I replied. Outside, a rider watched the crossroads from the shadows. Inside, I cleaned my father's old Navy Colt for the first time in years. The coming storm would spare no one caught in the middle, and I'd finally chosen where to stand when it broke. My saloon had become the heart of a rebellion. 3 days after Hayes revealed himself as a U.S. Marshal, the Crossroads transformed into a headquarters for justice. People who'd spent years living in fear began whispering their stories, then speaking loudly with growing courage. "Never figured you for taking sides," old Pete the blacksmith told me after testifying about seeing Judge Harmon and Hank meeting secretly the night before the Morales place burned. Hayes looked up from his papers. "Sometimes standing in the middle of the road just means you get hit by traffic from both directions, Sullivan." His words struck deep. My years of neutrality hadn't brought peace, just the illusion of safety, while injustice flourished around. A telegram arrived on the 4th morning. A federal judge was coming from Denver, but we couldn't wait. The forged land documents were locked in Judge Harmon's safe, and we needed them tonight. "If those papers reach the right hands," Hayes said, "the whole corrupt operation collapses." Our plan was set for midnight. As we prepared to leave, Sarah Whitaker approached Hayes and, to our surprise, kissed his cheek. "For luck," she whispered. Something shifted in Hayes's usually stoic expression. "We make our own luck, Miss Whitaker," he replied softly, "but I appreciate the sentiment." The courthouse loomed dark against the moonless sky as Hayes disappeared inside. I kept watch, heart pounding, my father's old Navy Colt heavy in my pocket. 15 agonizing minutes passed. Then I heard them, horses approaching. Hank Dutton, Sheriff Cooper, and 6 armed men rode toward the courthouse. Judge Harmon emerged from the shadows, fully dressed despite the late hour. "Find them," Harmon ordered. "Whatever it takes." In desperate need of a diversion, I slipped to the livery stable and found a bundle of old firecrackers. With trembling hands, I lit the fuse and tossed them onto a nearby roof. The night erupted with cracks and pops that sounded like gunfire. In the chaos, Hayes slipped from a window, clutching a leather portfolio. Our eyes met across the street. Success. But before I could move, cold metal pressed against my back. "Going somewhere, Sullivan?" Tom Wilkes' voice froze my blood. Hayes hesitated, seeing my capture. I gave the slightest shake of my head. He had to get those documents to safety. As he disappeared into the shadows, I was marched to Judge Harmon. "Where's the Marshal?" Harmon demanded, face twisted with rage. "No idea what you're talking about," I replied. Dutton's fist slammed into my stomach. As I gasped for breath, shouts came from inside the courthouse. "Judge, the safe! It's been opened! All the Homesteader files are gone!" "Take him to jail," Harmon snarled to Cooper. "Then find Hayes and those documents, or we're finished." The cell was cold and damp. Through its small window, I watched dawn break over Willow Creek, wondering if Hayes had made it to safety, wondering if Sarah was alive. Suddenly, gunshots and shouting erupted outside. The jailhouse door burst open. It was Hayes with Sarah and, shockingly, Sheriff Cooper. "Your timing is impeccable," I said as my cell door swung open. "Credit goes to the sheriff," Hayes replied. Cooper couldn't meet my eyes. When Hayes showed me the forged documents with my signature, one I never gave, I knew I couldn't continue serving corruption. As we hurried outside, an extraordinary scene awaited us. The entire town had formed a line facing my saloon, where Dutton, Harmon, and their men were cornered on the porch. Between these groups stood Judge Perkins from Denver, his voice ringing. "With authority, Harmon, you're relieved of duty. Surrender to federal custody. You have no jurisdiction here." Harmon spat. "Land fraud, murder, interference with federal witnesses, all federal crimes," Perkins replied calmly. "What evidence?" Dutton shouted, desperation in his voice. Hayes stepped forward. "The documents are already on their way to Denver, along with sworn statements from 17 residents of Willow Creek." Harmon's face crumpled, but Dutton wasn't finished. With a roar of defiance, he drew his gun and aimed at Hayes. 3 shots rang out simultaneously. One from Sarah Whitaker, clutching her father's revolver with steady hands. One from Sheriff Cooper, upholding his oath at last. And one from me, the saloon keeper, who finally chose a side. Dutton fell. The remaining men dropped their weapons as federal agents arrived on the noon train to take custody of Judge Harmon and his conspirators. Hayes approached me. The town had gathered in the Crossroads, celebrating their liberation with quiet determination. "What happens now, Marshal?" I asked. "Justice happens," he replied. "The homesteaders' lands will be returned to their rightful heirs. The railway will still come through, but on fair terms negotiated with the townspeople." Sarah joined us, standing close to Hayes. "And you?" she asked him. "Will you stay?" A smile softened his features. "My assignment was to investigate corruption, not to tend bar." He glanced at me. "Though I hear the Crossroads might need a new proprietor." I raised an eyebrow. "Thinking of a career change?" "I was thinking you might be," he replied. "The territorial governor needs an honest judge in Willow Creek, someone with legal training who's proven they'll stand for justice when it matters." My past in Philadelphia, the law career I'd abandoned, suddenly felt less like failure and more like preparation. "The saloon needs someone too," I said thoughtfully, looking around at the place that had been my refuge and my prison. Sarah stepped forward. "My father always said I had a head for business." 3 months later, Judge Michael Sullivan presided over his first case in the newly built Willow Creek courthouse. Through the window, I could see the Crossroads Saloon, now managed by Sarah. Whitaker Hayes, who'd married the marshal in a ceremony attended by the entire town. Hayes himself had moved on to his next assignment, though he returned frequently. Each time, he'd take his usual corner table, order a single whiskey, and watch his wife run the business with confident efficiency. And sometimes, in quiet moments, they'd both look my way and raise their glasses in silent acknowledgement of the truth we'd all learned. Neutrality is often just another word for surrender, and sometimes standing for what's right means standing alone, until others find their courage and stand with you. Justice, like a good whiskey, is worth waiting for. But unlike whiskey, justice doesn't come from sitting back and letting time pass. It comes from good people willing to risk everything for what's right. and in Willow Creek at least, justice had finally been served.